like you have to get the vibe. So yeah, just give me the go ahead whenever you're ready, Alexandra.
I think Kendra is setting it up. She needed to become host, so I think we're almost there. Thank you for your patience, everyone.
It's so nice to see so many of our docents and former docent trainees on this call. Hi, everyone. It's so good to see everyone.
You guys can begin. We are live.
Oh, okay, great. All right, welcome. Thank you for joining us and thanks for bearing with us for a couple minutes. So welcome to everyone in our Zoom room here and everyone who's viewing on Facebook. Just a couple of guidelines before we begin with our tour. So we ask that if you're in our Zoom room, you just keep yourself muted for the duration of the lecture or the tour, just so we don't have any interrupting or people speaking over our wonderful docent. We want everyone to be able to hear. And then if you do have questions, we welcome questions. We just ask that you put them in the chat at the bottom of your screen. So there's that kind of toolbar and you'll see a speech bubble. It says chat underneath. You can click that and you can go ahead and write your question, and then we'll probably get to them at the end. So we'll kind of compile them. And if you're on Facebook also, you can put your questions in the chat on Facebook. We'll be monitoring that. And then we can also ask those questions at the end. So we'll have time for a Q&A. So if we don't get to your question during the lecture, you'll definitely hear it at the end. And with that, I want to welcome our docent who will be giving our tour today. She's actually one of our new docents. She just graduated from our docent trainee program, so we're really excited to have her with us today. Her name is Florence, and she will be leading us on a tour of the collection. So Florence, you can take it away.
Thank you very much. Can everyone hear me?
Yes.
Well, I'd like to welcome you to the Timken as we are standing here looking at this beautiful shot of it. I would mention that as we go through the exhibit rooms of the Timken, all these slides have been pirated from the internet because of course the Timken is closed. So we've had to look around and try to find gallery pictures that will work well for us today. So I would like to welcome you first into the foyer of the Timken. And while we wait a little bit here, as we normally would for a tour, live tour, an in-person tour, we'll wait a minute or two for other people to still connect in. And while we're waiting, I would call your attention to the gorgeous tapestries that are in this lobby. And there are 4 of them. You can see them all together in this picture. And these are a wonderful collection from the French School of Fontainebleau. They were created in the early 1600s in the design studio of Antoine Caron. And they focus especially on a character called Queen Artemisia, who was a figure in stories created in the 1560s by Nicolas Huel, based on 2 real people, but his creation, his stories are fictional. So she's sort of an enlightened monarch type of figure who helps people envision what a monarchy, how a monarch should act. These tapestries would have fit between windows, so they're called entre-fenêtres. And they would have enriched a room as well as warming it. They would be easy to roll up and move around. I wanted to call attention to her name, Queen Artemisia, because maybe more familiar to people today is the Baroque artist Artemisia Gentileschi, who, especially if you're interested in feminist art, she's a very well-known character, but I would point out that her unusual name comes probably from the same queen. She's the same, she's living in the same period in which these tapestries were created, and the queen's story was so popular. Okay, I guess we will move into the galleries now, hoping everybody has tuned in who wants to. And we're going to pass through this part of the museum. This is the Italian and Spanish gallery. And if you follow my cursor, we're going to go over here into the icon gallery first. So the Timken's collection of icons is absolutely extraordinary. And what is also interesting about the way they're displayed is that they are fundamentally laid out as they would be generally in a Russian Orthodox church. So if you were in a Russian Orthodox church and you were looking toward the front where the priests and deacons would be leading the service, you would see a screened area called the iconostasis. And you would see a set of doors like these called the royal doors, which here are closed, but if you pull them back toward us, this is the entryway into the actual altar table, and where the priests and the deacons would officiate at the consecration. So this would be a typical layout. Now I'm going to turn you to the right here, especially to look at this large icon. There's so much to say about icons. Let's point out that generally icons probably function differently from almost every other picture in the gallery, in the sense that in the mind of the artist, this exists to pull you into an experience, into a spiritual experience. So how does that work? Well, the way icons are placed in an Orthodox setting, except for the ones on the wall and on the iconostasis that I just showed you, they are normally placed where you can get very close to them. Sometimes they're placed on a stand where there's like a kneeler in front of it. You can kneel in front of the icon. You can actually get so close to it that, as many Orthodox believers do, you can kiss the icon. The idea is with an icon is to pull you into what's happening in the picture. So it's really an invitation into an encounter with the figure in the picture. So in this case, we're looking at the Georgian Mother of God from the 17th century in a Moscow iconographic or school of icons. Icons tend to have multiple artists, so they are not signed. So people specialized in different parts of the work, such as putting on the gold leaf and so on. And icons are within a tradition. So for example, if you want to paint the Mother of God, there are certain attributes, certain symbols you must put in. And the icon painter, who is also called a writer, he writes an icon because the word paint and write in Russian is very similar. The icon writer knows that he is within a tradition. He knows what he must do to paint the Mother of God. And for example, some of those attributes, as you see here, are the 3 stars. There's one, there's another right under the hand of Jesus. The 3 stars represent the virginity of Mary before, during, and after the birth of Jesus. Jesus also has the attributes of holding a scroll, which represents the Old Testament, which he fulfills. And he holds up to his mother a piece of probably wheat, representing the offering of himself in the Eucharist. The deepest theological ideas in this painting, which it is trying to teach to the observer of it, are these abbreviations up here. So on the left, we have the abbreviation MR for mater in Greek. And on the right, the abbreviation theta sigma theos for God. So she is the mother of God. You see that also down here in the title. That's truly important because in the early years of Christianity, at least the first 4 centuries, the big debates were hey, wait, who was Jesus after all? It was sort of like, yes, Jesus lived, and yes, a movement of honoring Jesus as Lord and as Son of God had developed and so on. But people began to say, yes, but how did that work? How did that happen? Was he really God's son? Or was he just a human being that God kind of picked as a deputy to be the Messiah and so on? So there were enormous controversies. We call those the Christological controversies. And to zero in especially on one, the question was about Mary. Was she the mother of the Christ, the Messiah? Or was she really the mother of God? And of course, that was a very hard debate to resolve. The resolution was that she is Theotokos. So that is why this right here, this abbreviation is so significant, because it says Mater of God, not Mother of Christ. So this icon is teaching people and in a very simple way of presenting, yes, you must call her Mother of God. This would have had a metal screen over it, which I think adds a sense of mystery to icons. It adds another dimension, because when you have a metal screen over all but the most important parts, you can see where the metal screen was by seeing the nail holes all over this. And then you have to picture that there was a metal screen that would show her face and show the face of Jesus and so on. It adds another dimension that makes you want to go behind the metal screen. So it actually has a physical form of pulling you in to this painting, which functions like no other paintings in the same way in terms of inviting the observer into a religious experience. Here's a closer shot. And I personally have known an icon painter, and his wife is, he's a Melkite priest, and his wife is his assistant. And he, like other icon painters, would fast and pray for a couple of days before. And then together they would put together, they would write the icon. So it's a very spiritual type of experience. So we have to try to look at it the same way, try to think of how people related to these paintings. They are part of the media of the history of art, the media of the of antiquity, of the Middle Ages, going into the Renaissance and so on. We take media for granted, but you can't take it for granted in the past. And so pictures, artwork are the great media. Okay, let's leave this room where we've been. And we're going to come around the corner here. And first I want you to look at this painting right here. And I want you to notice how small it is. So I'm glad there are people in this picture, because that gives you some perspective to see that this piece right here is actually probably not quite 3 feet high. And it's a triptych, which means, of course, that it is 3 parts. And you could, if you were holding it, you could push the right side and the left side in and cover up the middle. And that reflects an advantage that it has, which is portability. So we're going to look more closely at it. And there's so much here we could say too. The portability, I believe, is related in this case to this person down here, which is St. Francis. So you can tell it's himself with the halo around his head. This must have been commissioned by Franciscans. And so he's the patron of Franciscan friars. And Franciscan friars would wander all over the place. They were radical in their day. They didn't hide out in their monasteries like many other religious orders did. They were out there with the real people and teaching the real people. And probably this was commissioned as an altarpiece, but you can see how small it is. It's a portable altarpiece. Probably, I'm guessing it could be carried around by Franciscan friars when they're talking to people and holding a mass or prayer service for people. And it is absolutely loaded with theology. So this is a visual way to teach people a huge number in one painting of the basics of Christianity, such as you have the angel here announcing to Mary over here that she would be the mother of Jesus. That's the Annunciation. Here in the mandorla, you have three persons of the Trinity. And notice that the Father, Son, and Spirit are all absolutely equal looking figures. So the painting is saying the Trinity is made up of equally divine figures. It's kind of interesting because they only have 2 feet down here. It's a little hard to see online. They only have 2 feet and 2 hands, but 3 bodies. So the artist, on the other hand, it could be, you see the arms of Jesus may go down to embrace his own cross and his own human existence here. So we could talk about this a lot more, but I have promised to keep this presentation today to 40 minutes. So we're going to have to keep moving along. Now don't forget, we can take some questions at the end. So if you have some questions, please type them in to the chat box as we go along. Okay, now we are back in Italian and Spanish gallery. And I want to draw your attention here to this painting over here by Savoldo. And this is a painting of St. Anthony of Egypt. Now, if you were online with us last week, you heard a very interesting discussion about this painting. And I don't want to totally repeat that. I just want to add some interesting things that we didn't have time to point out last week. So, and some kind of, I would say, current connections, surprisingly, to this, this famous character, St. Anthony. So, as you can see in the notes here, this is an early 16th century painting, and Savoldo was painting in Italy, but apparently, as we said last week, under some influence from the famous Hieronymus Bosch, the Flemish painter who painted very surrealistic type characters, little characters down in here, as you see. So without repeating a huge amount, let me just point out that this painting is divided obviously into fire and brimstone on the right and tranquility on the left, representing the struggle within St. Anthony himself, and therefore in others potentially, between everything awful on the right and tranquility on the left. Some people think it might have been commissioned for a monastery. Maybe this was the monastery. I think we don't have any clue for sure. But let me point out that historically, Anthony lived in a cave above the Nile, which is still there, and I'll show it to you in a minute. I believe this is the cave in this picture, and it shows up in different ways in different artworks of St. Anthony. There are a lot of artworks of this saint. He was really interesting to people throughout the ages, even though he himself had lived, I think he lived until about around 300. He was born in around 251 AD. He lived in this cave much of his life. And the reality of the cave is, and I'll show it to you in a minute, that it has a very narrow entrance right here, okay? That's kind of how you can recognize it in the artwork of Anthony. And this is in the center of all this action because it's in this cave where he's fighting evil and opting for good, hopefully. And as you can see, he's made a choice at this point to leave the cave and run toward the tranquility of goodness, the tranquility of a more settled life. And notice that his hands are pointing and asking the observer to do the same thing. So the artist, Savoldo, has given us suggestions of really awful, awful things that Anthony would have experienced perhaps in dreams and his own temptations and terrible nightmares as he's living in the cave. This was very typical. So what I wanted to tell you, in addition to what we also said last week, besides the fact that this is probably the cave, in the 16th century, and that's when this painting is done, Anthony is a patron saint of a people in pandemic. He's the patron saint to help you during a plague. Why is that? Well, because during a plague in the 11th century, people believed that praying to him had really helped them get through a plague. So in the 16th century, when various plagues flared up, he was the patron saint of that. And one type of plague that happened was skin diseases that were not understood, could not be stopped, and so on. And some of those diseases were called St. Anthony's fire. So they were reflecting on the evil that came to people. St. Anthony's fire, and St. Anthony will help you get away from it. I thought you might be interested to see the cave, and I have a Getty image of the location generally. And this is the monastery that St. Anthony began. Obviously, it has grown enormously over the centuries. They have added on sections, rebuilt sections, and so on. But this is the roots. The roots of this were founded by St. Anthony. If you follow the path right here, and it's a very steep path, they warn you to take a lot of water and that it's a very difficult climb. When you get up here, Anthony's cave is right along in here. I myself have not done this yet. I plan to when I can. But you can go up there and you can go in Anthony's cave, and it's like this. They warn you also that it's very claustrophobic, as you can see in the entrance. But once you get inside here, it opens up, and there's like the equivalent of a room where Anthony and other monks would have spent time. There are still monks living this way in this same region. I'll go back. So there are still monks living up in these caves, and you can learn about them on various presentations, for example, on YouTube. Okay, moving on, we're going to turn around in the gallery now and look at this painting by Zurbarán of St. Francis. Zurbarán was working in Seville, Spain, in the period of what is known as the Counter-Reformation. And that's very important to know about when we look at pictures from this period. So if you recall, the Renaissance issued into the Protestant Reformation, particularly in the 1500s. And the church had needed reform. Everyone agrees, everyone agreed then. The church had needed reform easily from the 1300s on. So the Reformation was an incredible reaction to the need for reform in the church. But also the reform the reform affected the Roman church in the sense that the church held various meetings, various councils, especially later the Council of Trent, to reform the church from within. And so there was a great emphasis on making religious orders be strict again, be genuinely committed to what they were supposed to be doing, and so on. So Zurbaran is within this atmosphere in Seville, where the religious orders who lived in what are called conventos, we use the word English convent, we usually only use it for women's residences, but in Spain, it refers to the residences of monks, friars, and so on. So Zurbaran had the great ability to paint saints' pictures that really spoke to the idea of the Counter-Reformation, that the members of religious orders needed to become stricter, needed to become more observant. So he was commissioned by convento after convento to paint various religious figures. We know that he did at least 34 of Francis. So look at Francis as he presents him, and in your mind, try to think, how did this speak to members of the convento for which it was commissioned? We don't know where it would have been placed, perhaps just on a wall of a room, a common room, perhaps. It isn't the type of painting you would have behind an altar, could be on the side walls of a church, a chapel, or could be in any room in the convento. And think about now, does it speak, what does it say to the Franciscan friar himself? Francis is dressed in the rough wool that we know he wore for his whole life. Actually, some of his garments have been preserved, and they're actually, you can actually see them in Assisi, and they're really, really rough, tough fibers. Zurbaran was very good at painting fabric. So he's demonstrating that with this rough cloth. But notice Francis's eyes also, they're closed, they're not looking at the viewer. He's not directly confronting us in any way. He's looking down. His eyes, if you follow the line, they're actually looking beyond the skull. He's holding the skull, which is typically a memento mori, or a reminder of death. But he's looking over this way. He's moved beyond looking at the skull. He's not interested in looking at observers. He has moved into a meditation, a spiritual experience of God, probably. His cap is a typical Capuchin type cap. Franciscans have different hoods, but his is this pointed one is called the Capuchin cap. If you notice in the San Diego Zoo, there are monkeys called Capuchin monkeys. And they're named after this cap because they kind of have this crest on their head. Anyway, think about if you were a friar who was not too observant and you needed to reform yourself and so on, and you encounter this picture. Francis is implicitly challenging you to be what he is, to do what he does. By the way, monks would possess skulls, okay? There are monks, for example, in the Sinai Peninsula, there's a monastery where the monks have a whole room of skulls. I tease and say you can meet the whole community at once. But anyway, monks will go in there and sit amidst the skulls and think about how rapidly life passes and how unimportant so much is. Zurbaran somewhat was eclipsed by Murillo, whose painting, as you can see in this phenomenal Christ on the cross, was far more emotional in many ways. This painting is called idealized realism in the sense that a crucified body would hardly look like this. There's no blood. There's no indication of bruises, no indication of what this body had been through. So this is a very idealized. By the way, the skull here is not so much a memento mori. The skull and the bone represent Adam. So in Christian theology, Jesus is the new Adam. Jesus does what the old Adam should have done. And okay, I have to keep moving quickly. Let's go back out through the lobby. And now let's cross over into the Dutch, French, and American sections. And of course, in the Dutch section, we need to go immediately to this phenomenal painting by Rembrandt at the end of the gallery. Let's look at it more closely. So this is Rembrandt's version of Saint Bartholomew, one of the 12 apostles. Some people say he was the same person as Nathaniel. But in any case, what's important here to notice is that Rembrandt is painting him near the end of Rembrandt's life. And Rembrandt's life had, at this point, taken a turn for the more difficult. He had married, he had children, he had made a lot of money, he had purchased a wonderful home, and he basically lost everything, very sadly. So near the end of his life, his situation is less optimistic. Also, he is a person of the Counter-Reformation. Now, he is on the Protestant side of it. So just like Zurbarán is on the Catholic side in the sense of you need to reform within the church. Okay, Rembrandt is on the Protestant side, the Calvinistic side in Amsterdam, and he's not getting much commission from the churches at all or religious orders, because the religious orders are either gone or the churches have been emptied of art because the Calvinistic side of the Reformation was against a great deal of art in the churches. But he got some commissions for saints here and there. And this is one of them, so Bartholomew. Now, one of the talents of Rembrandt is that he can paint a person's face to show different facets of their personality. So artists like to point this out, that you see a form of chiaroscuro going on here, dark on one side and light on the other. And you can also see the light side has been explained as, this is how he looks to other people. The left side, or excuse his, getting mixed up here. His left side, okay. As we look at him, the left side of his face, okay, his right side, is how he looks to other people. As we look at him, our right side of his face, the darker side, represents the torment, the worries, the anguish, the regrets, the irreconcilable things in his life. And this, of course, makes him incredibly relatable to many people, because we so well know that often the side people see of us is not the real concerns of the individual. Now we know this is Saint Bartholomew because his attribute is this knife down here. And the knife reflects that he was, according to the traditions in various Christian writings, especially the writings of the ancient historian Eusebius, he was skinned alive, either in Armenia or in India. And so that's why his attribute is a knife. When Michelangelo painted him, if you recall in Michelangelo's huge Last Judgment, there he is actually holding his skin, which was his terrible experience of death, but it was also his glorification, you could say, as a martyr. So is what's going through his mind as Rembrandt painted him is his knowledge, because here he is, obviously very mature, even older man who's preached a lot. Is it going through his mind that he probably will be martyred? Many martyrs, if you think about it, know if they keep doing what they're doing, they probably will be killed for it. Is that what Rembrandt wants us to think about? Did he know? Is he reflecting that deep sense of how his life will end? Obviously, we can't know. At one point, this knife was painted to make it look like a book, so that his identity was actually taken away from him by that artist. I don't think we know who did it, but obviously you can see it's been restored, so that we now know because of the knife that it's St. Bartholomew. Okay, moving on. By the way, I meant to point out, he is the most valuable, this painting by Rembrandt is the most valuable possession of the Timken. It's incredible that we have a Rembrandt. Okay, let's pass through. And I would like to talk a little bit about portraits. We're going to pass these two, which will be too fun to talk about, but we by Nicolas de la Gillière, French. These are in the French gallery. I want to point out that they're there as portraits of professional people, professional type people of the early 18th century. And then I would like to move in here into the American gallery to another portrait coming later in the 18th century. Now, the thing about portraits is they, of course, exist before photos. And therefore, they're one window we have into how, to some extent, people really looked. Now, we know that artists, of course, tended to fix them up. They really got enrobed, you could say, for these portraits, which they don't walk around all day looking like this, right? We know that. But their faces, okay, their attitudes, their attributes also can say something to us. And the thing about portraits now in the 21st century is if you know who your family was going back a few generations, you may very well find a link to certain portraits. I actually found a link to this portrait right here. And I'd like to tell you the story because to me, it's really fun. And I think it can happen to people with all kinds of portraits in the great portrait galleries of the art world, because in this time period, in our time period, with the popularity of doing genealogical research, you can get your family bloodline back quite easily a few centuries. You can find out who you're really related to or who interacted with your family, maybe to your advantage or disadvantage. And that can be very interesting. That's what happened to me with this picture. So I'll tell you the story and maybe some of you can relate to it. So this gorgeous picture, which is also very well known outside the Timken and is on the cover of the Timken art gallery guide and so on. This is Mrs. Thomas Gage, Sir Thomas General, but Sir Thomas Gage. And her real name is, her birth name is Margaret Kemble. So she is painted by the famous John Singleton Copley in 1771, when he was commissioned to do a number of paintings in New York City. She was actually from northeastern New Jersey, the part that borders on the metropolitan area. And she was already married to Thomas Gage. I put a picture of him down here, also by Copley, because he was, you can see he was done earlier than she was. He was done in 1768. And his portrait is now in the Yale Center for British Art. But he must have been very pleased with how his looked, because then he commissioned Copley to do Margaret. Actually, when Copley sent Margaret's painting to London to be exhibited and commented upon, some people said, oh, he made her so beautiful. So we know, we can guess that John Singleton Copley has painted her, let's say, to her advantage, which means he probably had painted General Gage to his advantage as well. So what did Copley do with her? Well, he paints her in a Turkish style with a Turkish headdress and a very loose kind of caftan robe, uncorseted, very beautiful flowing material, very elegant in every aspect. Obviously, she didn't look like this every day. But let me tell you a little bit more about what happened and how I came to really appreciate her personally. So General Gage, as you can see, was a general in the late 1760s into the 1770s, and he was in charge of the British troops in North America. He really did not want a war to happen. He wanted to prevent a war. And so at the outbreak of hostilities, which in American schools we learn as the Boston Tea Party, he was the commander at that point. And he was already married to Margaret. By the way, they had a total of 11 children. So when the Boston Tea Party happened, the planners of it were a group of people called the Sons of the Patriots. So my eight times great grandfather, Thomas Crafts, who was a painter himself in Boston, was one of the planners of the Boston Tea Party. And one of the people working with Paul Revere to plan further actions against the British. So as I said, Margaret herself came from a loyalist family in northeastern New Jersey. So that means, in terms we also use in the United States, she was a Tory, but she actually had divided loyalties because she was really American. She did not want her colonies destroyed and the people she knew to be involved in a war. So she was a loyalist, yes. Her husband's a British officer, but at the same time, she had a lot of sympathy for the American side of things. So people like my 8-time great-grandfather and Paul Revere and those working with him had hidden a great deal of ammunition in the area of Concord, and Thomas Gage knew it. So he planned a nighttime secret raid on that ammunition bank and planned to do this in the middle of the night. But somebody tipped them off. And because of a tip-off, Paul Revere was able to make his famous ride. The Patriots were able to defend the ammunition and led immediately to the battles of Concord and Lexington, which the colonists, the Patriots, won. Afterwards, General Gage, shocked at the number of soldiers he lost, said, I only ever told 2 people that we were going to do this, his second in command and Margaret. So his own assumption was that Margaret had given the information to the Patriots. And some people say that it's confirmed by the fact that he put her on the next boat to England. So Margaret was shipped off to England. My personal gratitude toward her is that if she did that, well, she assisted my 8 times great-grandfather and the Patriots. So I use it as an example of how interesting it can be if you try to relate your personal history to portraits, okay? And I'm sure others of you can tell stories. Maybe some of you can relate, for example, to the portrait of, whoops, where did I go here? I lost that. Maybe some of you can relate to the portraits of Madame de Sèvres and Pupil in the previous gallery and so on. So, gosh, I think we've kind of run out of time, but I believe I could take a couple questions. So,
okay, great. Thank you so much, Florence. Yeah, for those of you who don't know, and maybe I should have mentioned, Florence is a professor of biblical theology. Is that right? Yeah, and so I can tell where a lot of this knowledge comes from. It's great. You can really, you know, speak out about the history of these things. So we had a comment just about that last painting. Someone noted that apparently Copley's father-in-law owned the ship that was overtaken by the Sons of Liberty at the Tea Party. I had not heard that. Not sure if you know anything about that.
I don't know that part of the story. I do know that he wasn't very political, which is kind of interesting. And he himself, shortly after doing a whole set of paintings in the early 1770s, he himself went to London and remained there for the rest of his life. So yeah, he's an American painter, but really most of his career, I believe, was spent in London. Also, one thing that's kind of interesting is Margaret's own genealogy was Dutch, Dutch and Huguenot going back to New Netherlands. And because she and Thomas had 11 children, all of whom, I think all of whom spent their lives among the aristocracy of England, she contributed via her children a good strain of Dutch Huguenot ancestry to the British aristocracy, which is kind of fun to think about.
Yeah, that is interesting because she went back to England, and that's, I think, where you said she lived the rest of her life, right?
Yes.
Yeah, really interesting. Wow. And then we had another question going back to the Rembrandt painting. They asked, isn't the Rembrandt painting also a reflection of his own psychological state at the time he painted it? So we talked a lot about, you know, the figure in the painting, but more about Rembrandt himself.
Yes, and I think I hinted at that if I didn't say it, because yeah, is he painting himself even here? Is he certainly reflecting at this point in his life, which is very difficult? Yeah, certainly he relates. We could probably guess to how this man is portrayed.
Yeah, because you said that he had kind of, right, his fortunes had kind of shifted by this time in his life, right?
Yes.
Yeah. All right, well, I want to open it up quickly. If anyone has, we have a couple minutes. If anyone wants to ask a question out loud that maybe they didn't put in the chat, you can unmute yourself and ask a question if you have one. And also, if you're on Facebook, you can put it in the chat there and we can get to it. You would like to? Don't forget to unmute yourself. Okay.
Florence, I have a question. This is Anna.
Oh, hi, Anna.
How are you? Great job, by the way.
Oh, Thanks.
Yeah. So Christine and I were speaking about the Stella Maris, in the Georgian Mother of God. And just to clarify, we were wondering, well, actually the discussion was more about, are the Stella Maris, is that considered her attribute, or is it more of a symbol? I know it's kind of 6/2 of one, 1/2 of the other, but what are your thoughts on that?
I don't know that we would make a distinction between that. It's her when you see those stars.
Okay, so it's fair to say that it would be an attribute then.
It's an attribute, but it's theological too. It's theological symbolism, that's for sure.
Okay.
So, the icon writers of this make it a little hard to see the third one right here.
Uh-huh.
I looked at it for a long time, and that's where it is, but it's hard to see. Yes, thanks for the question.
Thank you.
Anyone?
Hey, Florence, I have a question. Hi, great, terrific discussion. You mentioned at the very beginning about, I believe it was a Baroque painter also known as Artemisia. What was her full name?
Artemisia Gentileschi.
Gentileschi.
Gentilescia. Timken doesn't have any of her paintings on display, but a lot of people know about her because not only was she female, but she was a real feminist of the early 16th century. She was a very forceful character. So I think in feminist, she portrayed women as she felt like they really felt and what they were really thinking. So
Interesting.
She's more popular. Her name is maybe better well known in our period than Queen Artemisia, but they come from a period when that name was popular.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Great. Any last questions? We can maybe take one more. Okay, well, I will address a couple of, we got just kind of some practical questions. So the first one, someone did ask when these pictures of the interior of the museum were taken, and I did want to make it clear that those were taken in years past. The museum is currently closed, and so when you see people in the galleries and stuff, those are from, we went through our archives of photos and news articles that have been written about us and used some of those photos from the past year, or not the past year, prior to this year. So, and the other question, we had someone ask if we have any content in Spanish. So we don't have any Spanish virtual tours at the moment, but we do have Spanish speaking docents. And so that's definitely a possibility moving forward to do Spanish tours online. We would love to do that. In the meantime, we do have some Spanish written materials that we could get you. So if you're interested in that, you can email us, go on our website and email us, and we can get those written materials to you. So other than that, I just wanted to remind everyone that we do have another tour at the same time next week on Thursday at 11 a.m. And then we also have that Jewels of the Season lecture about the history of our ornaments. That'll be at 5 p.m. also on Zoom. And the information for both of those events are on our website on our events page. So I want to thank Florence again. Thank you so much for your first official tour with us. You did wonderful, and we're so happy to have you with us. And everyone else, thanks for watching, and we'll see you next week.
Okay, bye-bye.